even listen to this. The sight and the sound of this crowd acclaiming their winner. Carlos Sainz comes out of the final corner for the final time. Carlos Sainz wins the Mexico City Grand Prix. A fine way to take a fourth career victory.
Yes, this is masterclass, Carlos. Dominant weekend, un mastino. Good job.
Yes.
Make a good weekend, Carlos.
Thank you. Oh, this feels good. Forza Ferrari. Gracias, Mexico.
Hello and welcome to the Undercut Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jesse Billington, and we are back to review the 20th race of the Formula One 2024 season, the Mexican Grand Prix, or Mexico City Grand Prix is its full title, really. And to do this, I'm joined by Thiemo Albus Daly and Ellie-May Taylor. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Doing well, Thiemo?
Yeah, not too bad. Pleasantly surprised. We got a good Mexican Grand Prix, and I'm just still trying to figure out what to do with that information, because if we'd put bets down at the start of the year, and we possibly did, this may be the one I labelled as the least interesting one, and I'm now going to have to find some humble pie.
I can go back and check, because we did make predictions at the start of the year, and we did ask people...
That wasn't a cue.
We did ask people which circuits they would like to drop, and I can tell you...
We could have drawn this out a bit longer.
Mexico wasn't on your list.
Miami then.
Miami was, though, yeah. But it's not the three of us. We are joined by returning guest, specialist coach for Formula drivers, Lower Laptime's Martin Villari. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me, guys. Sorry about all the time zone issues with me moving cities and being in Australia, but good to catch up. Let's pull at some F1 threads. There's a lot to talk about.
Oh, there is plenty to talk about. We'll go through a quick bit of news to start off with, and this is the ongoing series of announcements from Formula E for their all-female test that's coming up. And we've got Miki Koyama driving a new entry in the all-electric series with Lola Motorsports. They've got Yamaha backing to them as well, so it's an interesting lineup and a beautiful blue and yellow livery as well from what we've seen so far. But another driver to add to the list, and one that, weirdly enough, I don't recognise from any recent series. Thiemo,
Do
I don't
you
know
not?
Was she in
I'm going
W
to...
Series?
Yes, she was.
Yes. Yeah, I thought as much.
She was in W Series. She raced a lot in Japanese F4 as well, and Super GT, and this year in the Lamborghini Super Trofeo Asia Championship, which is one of those ones where, I'll be honest, I didn't know it existed until I did a bit of research, but good to know that she's been able to keep doing something in the meantime, and she's in P2 in the standings at the moment in that championship, so fair play. But yeah, familiar name, and glad we caught you out straight away in this podcast. That bodes well.
It's always a good start. The other important bit of news is, in fact, we had two winners at this weekend's Mexican Grand Prix. Of course, Carlos Sainz collecting his fourth ever career win, but also we saw Sonny Hayes topping the podium with Brad Pitt down over the weekend, filming at the track with some scenes to indicate that potentially his character won this weekend's Grand Prix, although they did make a complete goof because he's seen celebrating out of the car with his helmet off, waving around a Mexican flag, but he is still wearing his race gloves. And I don't know if you've ever tried to take a helmet off while wearing racing gloves. It is a pretty tricky damn thing. It's like the first thing you'll be getting rid of to even get out of the car is gloves off, buckle, then helmet. So
Sonny Hayes is just that good a driver. He can just do these things. You don't know, man. It's all part of the character.
I'm just starting to question whether or not they had the right set of advisors on circuit for
Starting
doing
to
some of
question.
these bits. I've been questioning it for some time. I'm still going to enjoy the film when it comes along, but again, if we're going to pick it apart on a completely technical standpoint, I'm certain that myself and many others will have a few things to raise.
That's going to be a solo podcast that you do where we just aren't going to join to take you.
I don't know. Martin might have a point on that.
I was trying to spare him.
No, look, nothing to add on that side of things. Sorry.
Damn, it might just be me then doing an incredibly critical look back on the F1 film. But more importantly, we have had the Mexico City Grand Prix, and what a race weekend it was. We'll jump in with a quick FP1 review because, of course, we had a fantastic series of junior drivers hopping in to do FP1 drives, 5 in total: Award, Antonelli, Behrman, Schwartzman, and Drugovich. And it was an interesting blend of results from the 5 of them. Pato Award put an F1 driver in an IndyCar, and I don't reckon in an hour he's getting within 1.5 seconds of the leader of that session, was his sort of statement as he got out of the car, and I think is a relatively fair one. Antonelli matched that roughly as well by being about 1.2 off of Russell's pace, but it's a relatively unstable Mercedes this weekend. It was one that was struggling in a few places and proved to be a bit scrappy, so it's not a completely fair read on Antonelli's pace. Behrman's run was rather ruined by Albon clattering into the side of him somehow in a fairly interesting spin at one moment. Schwartzman P19 is roughly where you'd expect a stake, but Bottas in P8 suggests that maybe there was something else in the car for at least that session. But tidy qualifying suggests there could have been a bit more from him. And Drugovich 0.2 off of Stroll, who's been in that car all season. Make your own decisions from that one.
I think we also need to note with Antonelli is that between him and Russell, they would have been on different spec cars, wouldn't they? Because of Russell's crashes. Russell was on Silverstone spec. Hamilton had this more sort of Mexico spec style car. But I guess we'll kind of go on to this later on in the race, is that I don't think the Mexican spec worked as well as they would like to when you kind of compare it to the Silverstone one.
No, the sort of... Go on, Martin.
Sorry, Jesse, mate. I guess the only thing I want to add was finally Antonelli put in a professional level practice session. Like, to see him stack it in Monza on lap 2 was like, where's the nurturing of the talent? You know, they bring the guy in, 4,000 cameras, and then it was good to see him build a week, like start to build a session like a professional should. So that was my only call out.
That was going to be my comment as well. It was nice to see him get through a whole session. This time I was cautious about it because I think, like we've seen, Award, he usually turns up in Mexico. Drugovich, he's done this a few times. Schwartzman, he's there to do something, I guess. And Behrman, we know what he's capable of, and we've seen him do this many a time now. So Antonelli was kind of the one critical unknown because all we got last time was that was potentially a really good lap. It was until it wasn't. A bit like Max's in Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago. Like, you could say it was perfect lap right up until that bit where he binned it into a wall, so it doesn't really count. So it's not, like you say, next step up. Nice.
Progress forward, which is what we want to really see from these FP1 sessions. We'll move from practice into qualifying, where Perez made a shock exit in Q1 of qualifying, now has more Q1 exits this season than Lance or Yuki. Again, draw your own conclusions. Piastri also out, first non-Q3 appearance this season, such as his consistency so far. 1.105 seconds slower than his best FP3 run, though. Temperatures had dropped a little bit going into quali, so there's a variety of different factors to potentially consider here. But otherwise, it's a strange blip on his relatively decent consistency to this point. Sonoda then binned it in Q2, blocking a chance for both him and Lawson to advance through, as both look to have a little bit more pace in the car, enough to challenge at least one of the Haas's and maybe the Alpine of Gasly. And then Sainz pins it to pole with a blistering run as scrappy laps behind him fail to make the cut.
The only sub 1 minute 15, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, even his first run in Q3 was actually going to be quick enough to hold pole, but he then went quicker again still. So really
that was
nice
the bit that amused me most on the team radio. There's Racing Enigma. It was a great lap, and I was like, 2 laps. I did 2 great laps.
Yeah.
It's very, very Carlos Sainz of him.
It's a good level of sort of confidence for him, which is what we want to see really in this sort of almost quite tragic swan song for him at Ferrari.
Well, he's not quite in the same league as Lawson and Colapinto in what I'm saying here, but we know he's there next year with Williams, but obviously it's Williams, a bit of a downgrade. So he's kind of very much driving with nothing to lose and everything to gain. So I was talking about this before the Grand Prix. It's nice that we're in this position in Formula One at the moment where we've got several teams that are capable of winning Grand Prix. Only about half of those drivers are still mathematically possible to win it, and 3 of those more likely than the others. So, but you've still got these other drivers as outliers where they can just do whatever the heck they want, and it doesn't really matter because they don't need to play team games necessarily. They don't need to do anything. And Carlos Sainz is that perfect kind of left field rogue choice to be like, I can just do what I want here. I don't really care. I don't know when the next time I'm potentially going to be getting a podium is, never mind a win. So why shouldn't I do this? And good luck trying to give me team orders.
Mm-hmm. I think importantly, go on.
Sorry, Jesse. Just on Carlos's pole lap, I just wanted to add, like, when I watched the onboard, surprisingly very little grip on that lap for a soft tire Q3 low fuel full battery run. Just the way he was walking the car out of slow speed corners, very gentle throttle introduction, keeping the steering wheel as straight as possible. A lot of short shifting, not only from second to third, but then third to fourth as well. So very dull. Like just walking the car out of these traction zones. I don't know, it was just surprising how little grip they had. So that was the only point I wanted to make. It looked like a race run, even though the lap time was there, if you know what I mean. So the cars were rapid in a straight line, but it looked almost wet out there sometimes.
Mm. It's a very strange circuit when it comes to downforce and generating that traction, but proved to make for an interesting race. So we'll jump into looking back on that quickly with the cliff notes of Ocon starting from the pit lane after a new battery unit. I think there were some engine components going into it as well. Russell, after his crash this weekend, was and this weekend and last was running a bit of a mix of Miami and Silverstone parts, while Lewis had this sort of new spec. Not that it seemed to help, and I know everybody mentioned it, and we'll certainly get back into it. Off the line, Albon is sandwiched between Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly, clips the former and sends him into the barriers with a massive sort of shunt, and a great shot from the guy operating the TV camera. There's this brilliant moment where all you see is rear wing heading towards him, and then obviously Albon retires as well with a broken front wishbone. After the restart, Sainz retakes his lead off of Max and Lando, and then just sort of Lando sends it off the sort of start finish line, battles hard with Max, and the two almost wipe out. Actually, it's a very interesting coming together. Lando goes to hand the place back, and Max forces him further off track, earning a 10-second penalty. Which he sort of nonchalantly accepts with sort of 10. That's a lot. And then obviously on the radio, you get GP going. There was a lot of moaning. Perez picks up a 5-second penalty for being out of place in his pit box. Alonso retires with a cooling issue, something stuck in a brake duct. Not hugely uncommon at Mexico. We seem to see that a lot. And also his first retirement of the season. We then get a bit of excellent wheel-to-wheel racing between Perez and Lawson. Perez dives on Liam and sort of shunts him off, then picks up a bit of damage to the floor and side pod. Max is then handed a second 10-second penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage when he got that place back over Lando Norris. And fast forward to the end, that's now 10 races in a row with no Dutch national anthem. Last year, we had quite the opposite of 10 races back to back with it. So an interesting race and some interesting results coming through to the end of it as well.
I want 10 back-to-back Grand Prix with the Italian national anthem next year.
That would be
because that doesn't necessarily mean just Ferrari, so it still means it's interesting.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of spice in there. With the race out of the way, we'll dump into sort of picking apart what went on. We'll start with the current, still just about, leaders of the Constructors' Championship, McLaren. And yeah, I'm not sure where Oscar's pace went in quali, but it was a great damage limitation drive. With Norris, it was a marked improvement over Cota, figuring out how to sort of better and more wisely race Max. I think we just need to get that a bit more consistent from my point of view.
It's a strange one from Piastri, I think, because it's also the time when the team don't need him to go and qualify, well, not get out of Q1, because now you've got to think, well, Ferrari have overtaken Red Bull in the constructors. They've got a few tracks coming up now which will suit the Ferrari probably, and you kind of need both drivers up there. So yes, it was good that Oscar then he had sort of a good comeback, but at the same time McLaren don't need him starting that far down on the grid.
Before Martin gets into the technical details of it, I'll do my half serious, half not take on it in terms of I think he qualified bad deliberately so he wouldn't be forced into helping Norris out and get stuck into this two-driver situation again. So it's like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't possibly do anything from back here. I'm afraid, Lando, you're just going to take care of it all yourself, I'm afraid. But on Norris, it was, like you say, just a race more than he needed overall. I'm not sure I agree on he's learning how to deal with Verstappen better because I just still question that. And despite Verstappen being Verstappen, you can tell that he hasn't really figured out what to do with him yet, aside from try to avoid crashing, which we've seen him successfully manage to not crash with him the last two Grand Prix, but he hasn't figured out what to do with him in the same way that Hamilton and Leclerc have in the past, for me, for example. I think Leclerc would kind of distract him with really decent racecraft. You look at the start of 2022, for example, of like, I can do what you can do and keep it relatively clean and everything. whereas Hamilton just goes, "I'll just headbutt you right back if we have to, and I'll go out with you. I'm willing to do that risk because then we're both screwed for it." And Lando hasn't, for me, figured out yet which one of these methods to go with, or to have his own style for it, and that's what's potentially going to cost him.
Yeah, look, I've got on my notes there. Starting Oscar on the mediums was still. Again, it's one of McLaren's racing operations errors that joins a long list of mine, of including racing operations errors. You only have to go back to the Hungaries, the Bakus, the Austins, the Monzas. How they lose that race 1-2 on the grid is just chaos. So starting Oscar on the mediums, like I don't really get it, to be honest. I mean, the play was all you're not going to go anywhere. You're going to lose so much time fighting through these guys and burn up those tires. You're not going to be able to stretch your legs, which is exactly what you want to do on a medium compound tire. You want to stretch your legs. So you might as well just take the hard, and all of the damage that gets done in the turn ones and the fighting with the guys, like it's damage limitation. Then if a safety car comes out, the medium guys, they fall back into your court. So that's exactly what you want to do on the hard compound tire. You want to start on the hard, and that chance of an early safety car will work in your favor as the mediums don't run away. I said in one of my videos recently, I'm looking at McLaren more of an engineering team than they are a race team. I think they lack so much racing IQ. Like, you don't need the data, you don't need the spreadsheets, you don't need the computer scientists and the race engineers and all. You don't need to get involved. Just run on the hard and see what happens. I don't know. Look, I don't get it. As for the pass, I mean, if we can start to talk about it, given that it's McLaren and Lando, I thought Carlos gave us the blueprint of how it's done. You've got to do something surprising with Max. You've got to fight and compete for the inside. He may, the best people in the world, they make the difficult things look simple. I thought Carlos did that beautifully. And I would like for Lando to take a leaf out of that book as well and compete for the inside. It's too predictable going around the outside. Like Max has options at that point. When you're on the inside, you're in control of the corner. I thought also McLaren just made a massive fuss about Austin. It was a storm in a teacup. Max was first to the apex. Max was on the inside. Lando overtook off the track. It's chapter over, end of story. The whole appeal was like embarrassing leading into this weekend. I thought, like, it was just save face, respect yourself, respect the 3-time world champion who's on the inside and first to the apex, and you went off the track. So I don't know what to make of McLaren making that call, but at least Lando had a good race, which is good for him. He got some points. Hopefully that helps to rebuild his championship charge. I know I've covered a lot of ground there, but I hope I added some value.
It felt a little bit to me, you're saying about the strategy and how to deal with Max. Just you saying about it, Ray, reminded me of how Norris was trying to get past Verstappen in Austria, but he just kept trying the same thing repeatedly and then wondering why it wasn't working. But it's now just on a bigger scale with the team. And you're like, do we tell them, or do we need to let them learn for themselves a bit?
Yeah, so it's interesting you bring up Austria because I've spoken about that extensively. Well, so Lando completes the successful move up the inside lap 63. Like, it was good as it's going to get. He dives up the inside. Max actually keeps the place off the track. And instead of Lando having the faith and reassurance in the rules, now I've done the successful move. Max has kept that place off the track. He owes me that back. I'm just going to chill out, save some battery, save some tires, wait for that penalty to come and then deploy everything. He attacks one lap later, mistake. Even to think about attacking is a mistake because he's already done, in my opinion, he's already ticked the box he needed to tick. So attacking was a mistake. And then when he does attack on lap 64, instead of going up the inside, which is what worked, he goes around the outside and gets burned again. So you've got to get with it sometimes, but yeah.
Going back to sort of this race, like you said, the brilliant move that Carlos did on Verstappen, and then you look at that versus Norris versus Verstappen. But do you think a lot of that is down to mentality? Because looking back, I think if I look between battles between Max and Carlos, they've always been kind of clean. I can't think of an incident where maybe one side, their confidence would be knocked, or Max has gone a bit more aggressive. Whilst I think when you look at then Norris and Verstappen, Norris is now very cautious because he doesn't quite know what Verstappen's going to do. So I think maybe then that's where you kind of get sort of these like tricky grounds.
Yeah. So there's certainly a mental side to what Max is doing as well. There's an intimidation factor. There's all of that that comes with it. Ayrton Senna was the same. Whenever he shows you a wheel, you would get out of the way because of the past crashes, and Max is not afraid to crash. Max is like chips are all in, if that makes sense. But I would like to see Lando compete for the inside more. That's the key part here. So in Austria, like I said, he did a successful move up the inside and then defaults back to the outside. In Austin, he didn't compete for the inside in that dramatic move at turn 12, whereas Max was competing for the inside. Even off the line, Max is competing for the inside and Lando's not placing as much importance on the inside. Here in Mexico, I don't think he had a choice. Like there was no gap on the inside. I thought he did a good job actually around the outside. I thought he got into the braking zone better than he did in Austin. And he started to earn the right to a little bit of respect around the outside there. I thought he did a good job. Whereas in Austin, he was kind of soft under braking, and that's ultimately what burned him. But he's on the racing line. He's where the grip is. He's the one with the speed and the downforce on the rubber. Max is the one braking on the dusty inside. You've got to at least outbrake him and then go from there. I thought he did that well in Mexico in turn 4. So I thought he earned the right to some respect. But what I always say to my drivers is around the outside is a low percentage play. I'd rather you compete for the inside and make of it whatever happens. It's just a lower percentage play. Like if you look at all the times Lando's attacked around the outside, this is probably the first one that's gone his way.
Yeah, it's an interesting swing, and I think there's a lot for McLaren still to learn as they fight their way back up to sort of becoming championship winning teams again. If you look back at how ruthlessly they operated back in their prime through the sort of the early noughties or the 90s, very different sort of aspect to the outfit. But a team that sort of found its form again when it comes to running a competent strategy, coming to organizing its drivers, is Ferrari. And it's exciting to see Ferrari back up there and properly fighting for it, not just lucking into positions, but actually being able to run a competent weekend and do that now back to back.
I have to say it before anyone else gets the chance to, but nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Nobody does. Certainly, sort of Mexico, when you've got that battle between Max and Lando coming along.
I mean, it was just a dominant drive from Sainz, like I say, in qualifying. He just put in these 2 mega laps. He's got nothing to lose at this point of his career. He knows what is coming in his future and that it's going to be a bit tough. And he's in a car that he said over the weekend is frustrating to see how good it is in some ways because he knows it's going to be a title contender next year and he's not going to be part of it. So he's got to do what he can with it while he's there. And just did a phenomenal job in the team aspect as well. Like you say, it was competent, it was thought through. Leclerc was he could have closed up and tried fighting for him, but I think he knows that it's possible to win the title, but it's not so close that he can afford to ruin or make tensions within the team at this point in the season, even if Carlos is leaving and that sort of thing. And he was thinking for both championships towards the end. We saw that with the team radio that he was doing for fastest lap. And it's kind of weird to say that they're the team to beat now. I absolutely love that, but it's kind of you don't want to say it too loudly because we know what they can be like. But the fun fact I'll leave you with is that Sainz is the first Spanish speaker to win in Mexico, which has got to hurt if you're Perez.
Yeah, look, from my point of view, for me, the Ferrari this year has been a world champion car. I honestly think the drivers haven't been switched on long enough to be able to realize that. And finally, they're waking up thinking, oh, this is a good car. Now, let me back that up with a few facts. This car's won everything from Monaco's to Monza's. So Monaco being, obviously goes without saying, street circuit, mechanical grip settings. Monza's being extremely straight line speed for days. Then in terms of championship length, it's won everything from Melbourne to now, like where it's covered some ground there, right? So you can fill in the dots and I think if the drivers had have been more in championship mode, and that's a mindset, that's a mentality, I think we'd be looking at them fighting for the championship. The same as McLaren. I think up to the middle of the year that maybe they didn't realize that this is a championship winning car and then moved into championship mode halfway through. So I think from the outset, the drivers need to think we're here to win this championship, and they're long championships these days. The 24 races, things change a lot. So I think the Ferrari's been a good car. And when it really confirmed it to me was in Singapore. I think it was lap 42. Nothing was doing. No one was fighting. Nothing was happening. And then lap 42, bang, Charles Leclerc sets the fastest lap. And I'm like, where did that come from? It's like, how's quick? And these clowns are qualifying P9, P10, like in Singapore. And it's got pace like that. So, and then Carlos was in the wall in Singapore qualifying. The little things like that where the car does have inherent pace. I just think sometimes the boys are a little bit distracted.
I think that's the contrast between McLaren and Ferrari is that McLaren maybe came into this year thinking somehow, considering they didn't necessarily start off as well as they are now, that we can do both titles potentially this year, and they had that mindset, but they didn't realize that they didn't. They just had that overconfidence, maybe, for lack of a better word, and to dumb it down a little bit. But Ferrari didn't think that, but had all the tools available to them for it. So it's kind of you've swapped the wrong things with each other, and you're both suffering as a result of that. And luckily for them, Red Bull have just dropped the ball on most things, and that's allowed them to kind of sneak past in a way. It's kind of you both have got a level of incompetence, if I'm going to be mean, but it's not damaging you as much as it would do if Mercedes and Red Bull were as together as we're used to them being, which is what makes it quite interesting.
Hmm. I guess the one thing I'll just add is the Red Bull was quick, and I'm speculating here, but just due to that torque steer, brake balance thing that, went away. We don't know much about it. And then the McLaren kind of found its pace when they had that mini DRS thing going on. And then, so that's the two parties for those two teams. The Ferrari hasn't had that. The Ferrari's just genuinely and fairly been a good car. So when those two parties were over and those two tools were no more, here comes the Ferrari.
No, I don't have anything to add. It's all sort of been it's still been said very well. I agree.
I mean, with Ferrari ticked off there, we might as well move on to the team that's now sort of stumbled back into P3 in the Constructors' Championships, Red Bull. And it's another weekend where you're just left asking, what has gone on here? How can a team that have had such a sort of strong handle on things since 2022 now be looking to sort of be fighting for their life, almost tumbling towards the midfield?
It is kind of a pleasure to watch, though, in some regards. You're standing back and you're just admiring it from a distance in terms of how can you go from, like you say, such a dominant standpoint to this. And I mean, it's just the fact that Perez was actively fighting Lawson and Stroll. And man, is it weird as fudge to be on kind of Stroll's side for that fight in some regards, because yeah, I don't like saying it, it doesn't feel right. And Lawson's aggressiveness in fighting him, you kind of have to love it because he's fighting for his future and knows that there's potentially several drivers that could replace him at RB for next year. But he also knows that if he plays his cards right, he could take that seat from Perez. And so he's also thinking along the similar lines as Colapinto in that I've only got X number of races potentially, and then that could be it. That I've been given the contract by Red Bull, they've taken the option up on me, but that could be their way of justifying not giving me a seat for next year and having fulfilled their contractual obligations with me, and then I'm left out in the cold. So I might as well kind of like I was saying with Carlos Sainz earlier, I've got nothing to lose and everything to gain from this. And so I'm going to fight that Red Bull. It's not my fault he's down here having to fight me, so I'm going to go for him. And Perez, yeah, I mean, just another shocker of a weekend or a World Grand Prix. And the thing for me that I found quite amusing was the kind of frustration and anger from him, especially the latter stage of the race. He was asking if the debris at T12 was from the same idiot from before, and then he'd been watching the highlights already. I'm like, well, of course you are. You're down in P15 with a damaged car of your own making because you raced poorly and qualified even worse. What was you expecting there? And did I miss something? A genuine question here, but he came in for the fastest lap, but he came out behind Sainz, who had already started the final lap. And when you're again lapped, he would need a full racing lap to get fastest lap. And if he came out behind Sainz, he would then be checkered anyway. So he came in for no reason and had no chance anyway of getting the fastest lap, even if he had to, because he hadn't completed a full racing lap. So, I mean, you were saying about McLaren fumbling the ball with strategy at times, Martin, but was that not just incredibly silly from Red Bull, or did I miss something there?
Yeah, it's a good pickup. I'm not actually sure on that one. I know he was competing for it. He was way off anyway. He wouldn't have got the
Oh
point
yeah, I mean
anyway,
it was never going to happen.
yeah,
But I just
I
thought,
mean,
well, he's not actually
yeah,
done a full racing lap because he's missed the start finish straight in the last corner. So I mean,
it's a
it
good point.
technically would be quicker because you cut off part of the track, but that then wouldn't count anyway. So I thought a bit curious, but yeah, Verstappen kind of being Verstappen himself, but it just didn't work this weekend. Depends who is in the stewards room. We can always have a little interesting conversation there, but at the same time, yeah, you can tell he's frustrated now with a lot of stuff within the sport in terms of the racing and then outside of the car, and maybe this is how he's venting some of that. And it's I think before we were saying it's like 2009 in terms of he's just got to do damage limitation, but now it's not even that the drivers that are his potential worst enemy, it's kind of himself if he keeps going on like this. And if he keeps getting a few more penalties like this, and he needs as many points as he can get, and even if it's the difference between P4 and P6, you'd rather be in P4 and get those extra points because you need to win by 1 point or half a point. You know, who really cares at the end of it as long as you get that title? And if he loses by 2 or 3 points, something like Mexico is going to really smart.
Mm. It smarts even more when you consider the fact that he's picked up 2 penalty points for it as well. I think he'd be doing well to get enough to accrue a race ban in this time because I don't think he had a great deal on his license as it was. But it's one of those things that obviously the FIA driving standards, they're all being renewed come Qatar. I feel they should be brought out a bit sooner, but those discussions have been had about sort of making those dive bomb moves into turn one and going, well, I was ahead of the apex on the inside. You sort of go, well, doesn't give you the right to shovel the other guy wide.
Technically,
Max,
Yuki was ahead of the apex for turn one. It was just the wrong way around.
yeah, he was
We've
unfortunately
got to make that argument.
backwards clattering towards the barriers, but that's been Max's modus operandi for quite some time, and that's why potentially we've always sort of argued that maybe Singapore is sort of Red Bull's sort of joker round, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's because Max has always struggled on races where you can't simply dive bomb for the inside and shovel the guy wide on corner exit when there's a wall there. And all of a sudden, it's at circuits where you get those nice big runoffs where you see Max making the most of that opportunity. But now we're going to see the rule book changed, and essentially every race for him is going to start to become a bit more of a Singapore. That might change the way he races. That might force him to play a different hand.
I mean, it was just bizarre. Is kind of what I was thinking. I mean, the first 10-second penalty, I kind of look at it that obviously Lando was going for the overtake, but at the same time, Carlos was right there ahead. I'm not too sure where Max could have gone. He would have had to have just yielded and just braked and let Lando go past, which I don't think Max is going to do. And then if Max hadn't have gone wide, he probably would have collided, I think, or the way that the angle looked, it almost looked like he would have collided with Sainz and then maybe took out Norris with him. So then it's kind of like, well, where does Max go? But then he's given a 10-second penalty for obviously them pushing off Norris. So and I kind of see their argument in that maybe it was just too forceful of Max. But then at the same time, I'm like, well, where does he go? Do you just expect him to back out completely? But I then think the second 10-second penalty was called for because it was totally out of order from Max.
Yeah, I think I agree on the second one because as much as I loved the ambitiousness there, that was a bit hot-headed if we're going to be nice about it. And you're like, that's not really needed there. But the first one, I look at then the incidents between Stroll and Perez and Lawson and Perez that were pretty similar looking to me from the angles that we got shown anyway. And I just thought, again, where's Lawson supposed to go? Where's Perez supposed to go there when you're both like that? So surely, like, again, it's weird that if you're going to give Verstappen a 10-second penalty for that, then surely you should give Perez a 10-second penalty for that one. It's, again, the frustration of the lack of uniformity from the stewards there. So, yeah, I think the second one, fair enough, as much as I loved the whole fuck it kind of attitude of I'm just going to go here and let's see what happens. But the first one, yeah, it was just kind of, I think if we hadn't had those incidents later, it'd be harder to argue. But because we've had that, again, with another Red Bull, it is just that it's frustrating. It's once again stewards being frustrating.
Yeah, look, I didn't really agree with your sentiments, Ellie-May. There's so many things that I want to say to him like that don't stack up for me. So we all agree that the second one was worse than the first one. Everyone agrees that. The whole world agrees.
Great
that. The second
television,
one
but
was, yeah, the second one was chaos, and the first one was, the grey areas. They both got a 10-second penalty. So Like that's the first thing that just doesn't make sense. Even if the penalties are wrong, whatever, there has to be a split between those two. If it's 5 or 10 and a drive through, or like there has to be some sort of split between those two because Max was borderline in the first one and the second one was chaos. So I called it
It's
like
like
the
that
first
difference
one.
between racing incident and deliberate, isn't it? You'd think you could
Yes.
classify the first one as a bit
Yes.
of like, ah, it's just first kind of
Mm.
incidents that happens there. The second one, you could tell he was deliberately trying to make something happen there and forcing it, whereas the other one, even if he was doing it deliberately, he's got enough cover from the way it looked to for it to not be that way.
That yes, exactly. That's the confusing part for me. In the first one, I thought, like I said before, I thought Lando did a good job on the braking. He got alongside, he earned the right to some respect. He also, I don't even think he had to get out of that. I think if he had stayed, they would have bumped wheels. He would have come off better. I just thought he was in a stronger position in that corner. He got sufficiently alongside. He had the inside for the next right-hander. He was safe there. But he was all Gucci there. He didn't need to do anything like he went off because Lando doesn't like confrontation. But I think if he had have stayed there, that car would have held its ground better than Max's, who had still steering lock in it, whereas Lando was straighter. I would have given 5 to Max just as a slap on the wrist because I thought he did, he did the Max thing. I spoke about in my review the whole Apex rule being a challenge moving forward. The challenge being Apex is not defined. Apex is not sometimes it's not a point. Also, it can in long corners. You think about Hungary's second last corner or last corner. These are long. China turn one. Paul Ricard where Leclerc crashed. These are long corners. Apex can be a region, can vary. My Apex can be different to someone else's. It's going to be chaos if they use that Apex rule. There's so many other little things that I pulled out in the wet, for example, as well. Apex's move and like it gets a bit wishy-washy. I think we need to look at it in the context of who's in front is important, but who's on the inside, in my opinion, is more important. Whoever's on the inside can control and manage the corner better. And then we need to look at the corner type itself, because like I said, Apex moves around. It's a moving thing. It's not a defined, fixed thing, if that makes sense. It is not like a line on the track, for example. And I think where we should get to with the rules is as if it were a gravel trap or wall there. I think if it was a wall there, Lando would not have pulled out of it. I think Lando was safe where he was. That's how I see it. So I think he earned the right to that place. Whereas if it was a wall in Austin, obviously he wouldn't have gone around like he did. He would have had to tuck in behind. So we need to get to that place with the rules because that's the truest sense of our boundaries and what would happen if it was a wall. The rules need to reflect that. So if it was a wall there, I think Lando was safe there. I don't think he needed to turn right and get out of that one. The second one, like I said, was chaos. Yeah, there's so many things I want to add on the Red Bull. Like the start from Max was amazing. Like, I don't know if you guys saw how much dust when Carlos took the checkered flag, how much rubbish came out of that track when he took the checkered flag. That's what Max was dealing with on his launch. Like that launch was one of the best launches I've ever seen in Formula One. Given the grip level and how quickly he got alongside Carlos, that's undefendable start. Thiemo, we've spoken about Max's only weakness being his emotions. And I think that was a weakness today when his tire wear, he was looking at this race thinking, my tire wear's like this. Lando's just passed me. I've got a bunch of penalties. And he just threw it all away emotionally. I think he could have finished ahead of the Mercedes. A lot of people on my video were commenting like, if he had have let Lando back through, Lando could have escaped and won the race. I don't agree with that. I don't think there was no guarantee that Lando would have tackled Carlos and taken the win off that. I think the smart thing to do would have been to let back through. We said in Austin, Lando should have let back through. Carlos yesterday, let back through successfully, and it worked for him. Why didn't they just get on the radio and say, Max, give that place back and avoid the whole 10 seconds? He would have finished in front of the Mercedes. I don't know. What do you guys think about that one?
I think there's definitely something to Max's driving temperament being one of throwing his toys out the pram. When things start to unwind for him a little bit, it's easy for it to spiral more and more emotionally for him. There's definitely something to that. And again, I think there's this sort of unwillingness to sort of bend or kneel from both McLaren and Red Bull when they sort of think they're constantly in the right. And it's this sort of strange level of entitlement that's slowly starting to cost both teams when it comes to things like handing places back or sort of just simply admitting maybe they were wrong. And you mentioned it with McLaren sort of questioning the penalty and sort of going, oh, we're going to sort of challenge that. You're sort of going, no, just give up and move on, please. It's childish and petty, and it's not the sport.
Yeah, it's that, but now it costs you points as well. It costs Max points. He finished behind both Mercedes. That's a point. Like, that's a silly call in my opinion. Like I said, everyone was saying that Lando would have gone on to take on the Ferraris. I don't think so. If you listen to his radio through the battle in the first stint, he kept saying, "Oh, I don't have the pace of the Ferraris." Like, he kept encourage everyone to listen to that. But I want to hear what you guys think about, should he have led him back through or should he have not?
Oh,
I feel like
certainly.
he should have.
Yeah, without a doubt, really. That would have saved him half of his penalties and again would have kept him in touch with the Mercedes, and as opposed to sort of scrapping away constantly with the midfield, bouncing in and out of the top 10.
Or have just not tried it at all.
Yeah,
that's not
exactly.
going to happen, though.
Because I mean, I know they gave him then obviously a 10-second penalty for the first move, but I don't know. I just think if Max hadn't have gone for it the second time round, there then could have been an argument of should Lando have given that back because he went off track and gained a lasting advantage. Then Red Bull better position to fight, but.
Whereas again, it's the first one was reactionary, the second one was deliberate, and everyone was so focused on Verstappen's dive there that no one considers what you just said. Then anyway, in terms of what about Lando and that situation. So it's by doing it, he buggered himself twice in one move, because then he still doesn't have the position and he's cost himself in the process. Where if he just waited, like you say, and maybe Norris would have had to let him past, or he could have just overtaken him because they were still fairly close at that point in time.
100% agree, Ellie. Like, don't do that in the first place. But that's what your team is there for. When they see you doing those things, Max, that was too much. Swap them back around.
Yeah, good luck trying to tell him that on team radio, though, and getting a sensible answer out of him when he's in that frame of mind.
Look, I agree, but you've got to do the right thing.
Oh yeah, you got to try.
Like,
I don't think it would have changed anything.
It's a challenging one. Meanwhile, opposite side of the grid, Mercedes having a very fun battle to themselves here. And a little bit of me wants to know the engineering behind Russell's less draggy front wing. We saw that it had a sort of collapsed set of vanes on one side that might have just been shedding a lot of sort of downforce, which could have helped him sort of battle back against Hamilton on the straights. But either way, it's a congratulations to George Russell on completing a Grand Prix won by Carlos Sainz. This is the first time he's ever actually achieved that sort of strange feat of circumstance.
Yeah, not much to say here, really, is there? At least from me. Just a fun, dicey battle between the two of them. Hamilton's on the way out, so they're not going to necessarily give him priority and ask Russell to move out the way. Just a shame it's for P4 and P5, but at least they're able to maximise when they don't have the complete package.
I just think this kind of shows that they don't know their own car. Because surely Hamilton should have had the advantage on Russell if he's on a Mexico spec car and Russell's on the Silverstone old, like he doesn't have the upgrades due to all the crashes.
Logic would suggest this, yes.
It kind of sums up their whole season, that they just kind of don't understand their own car.
It's one of those ones where they've been like this since 22, and we were saying before about Aston Martin being in a little bit of a no man's land of constructors, but that's changing now as we get to the minute. But Mercedes are more the definition for that. You look at the gulf between them and the top three, and then to Aston Martin, and you go, you understand enough of your car to not fall back so dramatically that you're with everyone else, but you don't know it anywhere near enough to be with the front running three, even with all the mistakes that we've been saying about that they're making at the moment and all season. And you also, there's some weird logic not working when your Mexico spec and your Silverstone spec essentially do the same thing, but just differently and not necessarily better than each other. They're just because you're still finishing P4 and P5, and you're just going, So we've improved it, but we haven't. But maybe, but we're not sure. Like you say, we just don't know.
It's tricky. The only thing I'd add was like Hamilton keeps complaining, oh, the car is totally different when we get to qualifying it. And I didn't change anything. But then he said, oh, we made a small change to the rear wing between FP3 and qualifying. So Hamilton's tricky. Like you've got to interpret his messages. He'll say things like, it's not my fault, I didn't touch anything with the car, it should be the same. Then he's made a change, firstly. And secondly, like you mentioned, Jesse, the track temp is changing. So even if you didn't make a change, the world is still spinning, my friend. So the track temperature is changing. These tires are sensitive. We all love F1 for being a technical sport. And then when it's too technical and they don't understand it, it's like, oh, what the hell's going on? So
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And Mercedes' sort of ongoing battle seems to be one against their own sort of car and development. Meanwhile, Aston Martin just seem to be having no battles at all, apart from very briefly one with some litter and one with Sergio Perez. It really must suck to be Fernando Alonso going out like that on your 400th Grand Prix weekend. Not necessarily his 400th Grand Prix start, but 400th Grand Prix weekend. There's a bit of a split between them. Stroll just looking a bit lost across the whole weekend as well.
If it makes you feel any better, Alonso's 300th Grand Prix didn't go any better either. He DNF'd from that one as well with McLaren retired from the garage. So consistency. Hope better luck for number 500. But yeah, like you say, a bit like that, and a bit like F1's 1000th Grand Prix. It's just a bit of a dud for Alonso. And I mean, Stroll at this point. I mean, I've already weirdly been on his side for an overtake this battle with Perez, so I don't feel like I want to say any more with risk of vomiting and feeling just nauseous about all of that. So.
Yeah, the only thing I really have to say about Aston Martin, because it was sort of in like kind of a no man's land, was that I think, yeah, Perez should have got a penalty for pushing Stroll off.
Yeah,
So,
a bit of consistency from the stewarding one, but again, that's one of those loops that you can sort of keep going back to time after time, and it constantly begs a different question. But otherwise, Aston Martin are just starting to fall that bit flat, and you've got to hope that maybe Adrian Newey's got some magic in his pocket when it comes to the next few seasons. Otherwise, it's with Aston Martin out of the way, though. Massive success for Haas this weekend. Quiet competence from them, really. Nothing too showy, nothing too flash. A little bit under the radar, but it's now back-to-back double points weekends for them, and really putting pressure on sort of the teams ahead and sort of starting to try and pull away from the teams behind as well. They are a bit of a cork in the bottle when it comes to trying to get into the points. There's two more drivers that are regularly in that top 10, and if you're all of a sudden qualifying down in sort of P13, 14, 15 when you should have been up there, there's another two drivers you've got to contend with. And Magnussen and Hulkenberg have just been driving on pretty exceptional form these past two weekends, certainly even weekends prior to that as well. There's just been this little bit of a spark from them, and I think it's a testimony again to what Ayo Komatsu's been able to do to revolutionize a team that's at best a quarter or a third the size of its nearest rival.
I mean, they needed to get, I think, an average of 10 points a race to get Aston by the end of the year, and they got 8, I think, this weekend. And you think, 5 races to go? 4? 5? 4?
Four.
Still very doable, especially if Aston keep doing what they've been doing this weekend, not getting any points whatsoever.
and you've got to think as well, Piastri couldn't catch Magnussen. You know, the McLaren is at the best car on the grid currently if you look at the constructors, and he put in such a phenomenal stint, I mean, for the whole entire race, that Piastri then just couldn't match it. And it kind of then made me question, do teams lock their drivers in now too early in the season? And I think, do you think this will now be sort of the catalyst for change? Because it's like, if you looked at Magnussen in the first half of the season, you'd be like, okay, you see why Haas is no longer kind of going with him and changing him for Ocon. But now you look at the second half of the season, and Magnussen, for me, is doing really well. And then even if you look at sort of the other teams, you know, how early they locked in Perez at Red Bull, and because he wasn't doing too badly then, and now he's gone sort of downhill. And then even when then you bring in sort of, we've now got, obviously RB haven't got their second driver yet, but you know, you've got Lawson coming in the second half of the season, you've got Colapinto coming in as well. Both of them at the minute, I think, deserve drives next year as well. And it's, yeah, do you think this year will kind of make teams change their mind into locking drivers in so early on in the season? Because we never used to see it this early.
Magnussen to Red Bull for next year alongside Verstappen.
Wouldn't be the wildest thing. I think the Magnussen argument's interesting. I think he's one, driving with no pressure on him, and two, there's the added advantage of that car is starting to just genuinely get better as well. So obviously improvements are sort of shared between both driver improvement, driver sort of happiness within the team, and also simply the fact the car is better. I don't think we're going to see Kevin Magnussen return 2026 Formula One world champion, but it's yeah, there's a turnaround in the form of both drivers and the car as well. I think it's a more broader picture than simply just a driver going, well, you're getting rid of me now. I'll show you, or possibly sort of a contrary to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not super convinced that it's Behrman taking that seat, right? I'm not super convinced Behrman is going to do a better job than Magnussen. I have to be honest. What do you guys think on that one?
I think we'll see an interesting bedding in phase. Again, it's a bit early to try and call that, given we've only seen Behrman do two races and two relatively interesting races when it comes to sort of circuit wise and outcome. They're ones where if you qualify well, you can often finish well. When it comes to races where we see a bit more of his racecraft per se, it's likely to be a different outcome. And again, I want to give him a good few rounds to sort of settle into that car.
Yeah, he has
Behrman's
done
got more of a
great.
leeway with it because he's only had those couple of races. It's the same like we were talking about Colapinto before we recorded the podcast. Whereas I think the question would be is Ocon going to do a better job than K-Mag or Hulkenberg because he's been around for a good while now, and if it's the thing we can say about a driver who's been around, has a lot of experience, so in theory should be able to get at least on par with what Hulk and K-Mag are doing. If not straight away, then pretty quickly. Whereas if Behrman does better than Ocon and that stays the way for the season, that's going to be quite interesting as well. And it just seems a shame to have gotten rid of both drivers there for next year when they are having this miraculous turnaround in some respects. And you'd hope that maybe one of them at least would have stayed to keep that continuity going because at least then you know what you're doing with one of them. You've got that potential banker driver. Whereas they're having this excellent season and then they're having to start from scratch in some ways and go, we know we've got the car, but maybe we now don't have the drivers. And then that creates a whole other cacophony of headaches.
I agree with you, Thiemo. I think
Flip that and send it to me, Jesse, would you?
I think let Behrman have his chance. But I was kind of at the kind of same argument as you is that would I be swapping Ocon for Magnussen? And I don't think I would be. Obviously it's hard because the Alpine has not been great this year, but Ocon hasn't given me anything sort of outstanding that I think, oh, he should be swapped for Magnussen.
Yeah, we haven't seen anything particularly exciting from Ocon for quite some time, and I know we'll get to the Alpine cars in a minute. We'll move on for the sake of sort of promptness and brevity to Minardi, and I feel like there's still something to talk about with them, certainly coming off of this weekend. A bit of a rough one for Yuki Tsunoda, obviously, backwards into the tyre wall at turn one, not where you want to be. Not a great weekend for him, and it wasn't a great one in Kota either. We're sort of on a bit of a bum form for him. But Liam Lawson,
that was very much the bit where he's flying backwards into turn one, where you freeze frame it and you have the narration of, you're probably wondering how I got here.
Yeah, it's I think I've posted on the podcast's Instagram account. There is a shot from, I think it's Good in Images. He's a really good photographer who actually caught quite how close the back of that car was to the television camera. And credit to the TV camera operator, he is still clung onto that camera, keeping it pointed at the action, pretty much blissfully unaware that there is a Formula One car heading backwards towards him at the best part of 100 odd miles an hour. But yeah, I think it's bum form for Tsunoda over the past few weekends. This weekend was not really his fault when it came to the race, at least. Lawson, on the other hand, though, there is something quite special there. I just hope that Red Bull are able to actually properly develop him as a driver, as opposed to just sort of chuck him at it and see what sticks. They seem to have done with so many of their drivers before and ultimately wasted some good talent.
Yeah, look, I think they've got a good lineup there. With Yuki and Liam. It's tricky with Yuki because he actually does a good job. He's done a good job this season, but for some reason, I'm not sure obviously Formula One's a piranha's tank. It's full of politics. For some reason, he's not really being considered for that Red Bull seat, is he? I don't know what you guys think, but I think they should leave that lineup for a little bit and just play the consistency approach. They've been throwing drivers in and out for a long time. I'd just leave those two in there. They're doing a good job. Liam's doing a good job. I thought, yeah, with the crash leaning more towards Yuki. I mean, if you look at it, Yuki's nowhere near the edge of track limits. If anyone has space, he does on his left. But absolutely it was a racing incident. Like there's no blame on either side. But I always look at it from the point of view of, and you have to, like, sometimes, like, what can I do to avoid things as well? Like, even if it's a racing incident and it's no one's fault, there's always something you can do to avoid it. Like, look at your past historic races, check your mirrors, use all of the track. Like, tick all these boxes, and then you find that you don't have as many accidents.
I think it was one of those ones where even if he'd got past Albon, he wouldn't have he would have either, sorry, crashed into the car in front or not made it for turn one either, because it seemed like he was just carrying way too much speed there. So regardless of, like, he'd already committed at that point to making a move, but whatever happened, it wouldn't have made the corner anyway, and the position wouldn't have been gained. So I don't know. It seemed a bit of a waste there on that one, and I know you've got to go for it. It's lap one, turn one, and all this sort of thing, but it just seemed a bit unfortunate there. But with the driver lineup, I half agree with you in the sense of continuity would be nice for a change and just to see what would happen there. But I also would wonder then who would they put in that second Red Bull seat if they do get rid of Perez? But then because of the consistency issue, if they put Lawson in the Red Bull seat, I then fear is maybe a strong word because I'd probably be more entertained than anything. It would be interesting to see who they stick with Yuki because they've got some junior drivers, but I don't know if I'd put any of them into an F1 seat at the moment, which then brings the conversation to people like Colapinto and you look outside again. But then, I don't know, it just seems curious then as what do they do with Yuki? They've clearly never really had much of an intention of promoting him up to Red Bull, regardless of what he does. So does he stay? How much longer does he stay? And all that sort of thing. But Lawson, yeah, I agree with you, Jesse. He's something special, and the team radio was good fun as well. It's that kind of calmness that we get from Piastri, but with the sass that we get from other drivers. And it was that very nice combination. And I thought he got buggered a little bit with the strategy a bit at the end, but overall it was a really strong Grand Prix for him. And I really want him and Colapinto to stay around next year wherever I can get them.
Yeah, look, I think if they, sorry, Jesse, if they get rid of Checo, Carlos has in his contract that if a seat at a top team opens up, then he can jump over there. And that works also for Franco. That means he can stay in the Williams. So I think Checo's the cork in the bottle. There'll be a spot for someone at Red Bull. I think it's a bit early to chuck Lee. I mean, you don't want to make the same mistake that you made with your Gaslys and your Albons and chuck them in next to Max and then spit them back out 6 months later. Like, let Liam grow, let him develop there. Checo's the one that's got to go. Come on, guys.
For our resident Red Bull and Carlos, not Red Bull, but Williams and Carlos Sainz fan, would that work for you, Ellie-May? Would that be all right? Or would you rather him and Williams because it's just such a nice marriage for you?
Don't know. I'm torn.
Are you a big Williams fan, Ellie-May?
I am a Williams fan, but I'm also a big Carlos Sainz fan. So it's kind of difficult because it's like I'd almost like to see him at Williams and see whether he can help turn the team around. But it's whether they're not going to, as much as I'd want them to be, they're not going to be up there at the minute. But then at the same time, I'm like, well, if Red Bull's on going downhill a bit and they don't have, they can't find the momentum to sort of switch that and go into an upwards trajectory, is there much point going to Red Bull, especially if you know you're going to be the second driver to Max Verstappen? He's already just kind of in some ways had that with Leclerc, despite proving that he is an exceptional driver, and yet they still said, no, we're going to get rid of you for Lewis Hamilton. Sorry.
It's that mix, isn't it, of do you do what Albon essentially did and turn down what was supposedly Red Bull trying to lure him back to them and going, no, I quite like it here. They prioritize me to actually give two hoots. and I can help build this team up to be something, and Carlos can be part of that? Or does he just do what he's done at Ferrari and show that he's at least as good as Leclerc is on occasion, and that he can beat him and take it to him? And if Verstappen spirals alongside Red Bull, we know he's not going to be there forever. How long does he decide he wants to be around, especially if there's all the politics going around outside still that's been gnawing at him? And then is that easier for Carlos to beat Verstappen one on one in the same machinery if it's not a top car and you get to see two drivers desperate to be in a top car and have the potential to have that car with a top team, and how they can deal with each other and the pressure for it? And if you beat Max Verstappen, then you are then the top dog at Red Bull, which when they come back, which you got to think they would at some point, that's not a bad position to be in. But I appreciate the headache that you have with that. And I don't have I think I prefer him at Williams, but that's just because I also quite like Williams.
I think Carlos and Max have been teammates before at Toro Rosso, so that's the first point to make. He knows what to expect. He knows what to deal with. He'll know, like, he can manage that. Secondly, not only were they teammates, he could compete with Max as well. Like, they were on par when they were Toro Rosso. So obviously Max has moved on and he's a three-time world champion since then. But at that point in their careers, he could compare. I think Carlos would hold his own. He's been Max's teammate before. I think it'd be fine. I think that's the most logical one, is that we say goodbye to Checo, get rid of him, put Carlos in there, back in a top team, and we keep the talent that is Franco. And you've got Franco and Alex. Ellie-May, you have to be happy with that.
I mean, I would like to see Franco here next year. So I think, yeah, if you say it like that, then I think I'd agree about moving Sainz to Red Bull so that Franco can stay in Formula One.
Feels like we're doing an episode of Porn Stars. We're like, here's what you want, here's what we can offer you instead. Are you happy with this?
I mean, it does feed nicely
Argentina,
into talking about Williams and obviously quite how well Colapinto's been racing. A little bit scrappy, but the spirit is there and he can really hustle. It's another weekend where, by no fault of his own, really, Albon has sort of come out looking sort of second fiddle to the young contender.
I'm not sure, Jesse. I mean, Albon out-qualified. Okay, it depends which way you look at it. I thought Albon out-qualified Colapinto beautifully. On which grounds do you think Colapinto did a better job?
I think overall the performances have looked a little more fluid. There's been a sort of a drive of panache from Colapinto that's shown him off to be a little more, I don't know, I don't want to say talented, but certainly an exciting prospect that's maybe put a bit of sort of smoke up Albon's sort of arse and just sort of given him a bit of a kick that he might need just to stir on a bit. There's certainly, this is a sort of a very terrible sort of phrase to throw around, but internet consensus that maybe they're sort of looking like a lot of competition. It's not going to take a great deal for Colapinto to sort of get close to drawing level with Albon on points if this is sort of the level we're going to see him competing at.
Yeah, I think Colapinto's done a good job previous races. I think in this race, sorry, I think I feel sorry for Alex. He did a good job in quali. He made it into Q3. His teammate got kicked out in Q1. Argentina are going crazy for Franco. Even on my page, I've got a Spanish segment dedicated to a Franco update now because one of my videos went all through Argentina. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending which way you look at it, they're going crazy. They're like, do you agree with the 10-second penalty? Do you agree with the 2 penalty points that Franco picked up? 4.4-second pit stop. This is a conspiracy. Like they're so into it, like you would not believe. They're calling for me to coach Franco as well. I said on the Friday, I think I said, look, Mexico, it's tricky to pass. The most important thing is get familiar with the soft compound tire and get a good quality. And that's what I said on Friday. And he did the opposite of that. He did a lot of medium tire work for some strange reason on Saturday morning. And then he had a bad quali Saturday afternoon. He was not comfortable with the soft compound tire. He was complaining about balance. But then he had all the medium data. Like, that's useless. I just feel like qualifying was where it's at. He didn't put enough attention or focus onto that. Again, it's the Williams engine. It's Formula One engineering. They've got all their run plans. It's 10 laps on the medium, 5 laps on the medium. We'll do 10 laps on the soft, and then you get one little qualifying practice at the end. But Franco needs more than that. He needs to set the car up around the soft tire. He needs to build confidence with the soft tire. He needs a good qualifying here in Mexico. Like that's going to get him out of the riffraff and up with the Alexes in Q3. Like that's what needed to be done. He needs to build that confidence because he's not, it's his first time at this track. So I don't know where these run plans come from. Anyway, because I said that on Friday, you should see the comments on some of my YouTube videos. They're like, it's chaos. Like they're calling for me to coach Franco. Now he does have a coach, Lucas Benamo, I think his name is. He's been with Franco since karting, since young. I mean, we have to respect that relationship as they've built up to this point. But I was saying to my partner earlier, Formula One is not a place where you celebrate the end of a journey. Formula One's where the work starts. It means you need 2 or 3 coaches, mental, physical, technical, and special or other. Like you bring in as many as you can. So it'll be interesting to see how he manages that, Franco, because yes, he's made it here and he's made it in the sense that his Instagram blew up. People are throwing money at him. He's made, but like I said before, Formula One's where the work starts. So it depends. I just want to see how engaged he is.
It's like the Murrayism, isn't it? It's one thing getting up to the back of your phone, it's another thing passing. Like, just you're here now, another thing actually staying here for the long haul.
Yeah.
I think we've already sort of mentioned a fair bit about Williams, so if no one's got anything else to chuck in, we might as well move on to the very easy subject of Alpine, who had a fairly innocuous weekend, really. Gasly P10, and I think that's about it, really, for them.
The only thing I've got on them is that they're now only 3 points behind Williams in the championship. So Williams need to sort that out because it'd be a shame for Alpine to get past them. I don't know if there's much chance of it, but at the same time, you only need Gasly to finish P10 in the next 3 or 4 races for Williams to do what they did this weekend, So Williams need to get at least one of their drivers in the next 4 Grand Prix to just somehow get like a P7 or a P8 and just be as comfortable with it as they can.
Yeah, I think Gasly seems to be a bit stronger in his performances this sort of last few races. And it sort of finally came to sort of any form of fruition this time with this P10 and just kind of quietly, I think, got on with the job. Ocon was there. I mean, it's a bit hard for him because he was obviously starting from the pit lane. It's been an Alpine. You kind of, what can you realistically do? But
it's a car that just still seems very sort of underdeveloped and unset up for a lot of race weekends, which leaves a lot of onus on the drivers to achieve things. But again, it's not a sort of setup that seems to be conducive to sort of scoring points. And I think with Perez, they might have lucked into that with certainly Checo and Oscar sort of tailing back quite early on. It gave Pierre a chance to sort of get into that points and sort of embed himself into that sort of close to the front running field enough to sort of cling on to things as things changed over time. It was, possibly a bit of luck that helped Gasly along the way with that one. Final team to cover is Stake, and this is probably a relatively easy one to cover. We saw them on TV and they weren't spinning.
You were saying about how it's the driver's responsibility in these kind of teams to do what they can with the car to really like show what they're capable of, show their mettle. So this was a fun fact I found. So I've actually got something to say about Stake. They're not going to be happy about it, but I've got something. Bottas, currently 23rd in a 20 driver championship, has only run in the points, bear in mind, not finished, just run in the points for a total of 20 laps so far this year. That's it.
How many of it would have been this race as well? Because he was kind of
there for exactly. Probably at least half.
Yeah, which then kind of begs the question of could they have done better with their, because Bottas wasn't. Well, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, obviously, but I know, but Bottas was sort of, I guess, kind of teetering on the edge of points, was obviously within the points. Obviously, he started on the hards, and they just kept him out for as long as possible, waiting and waiting for a safety car that never happened. If they put him on a better strategy, I think maybe they could have made something out of it, but they just didn't.
Pretty much the
think
narrative of the whole season as well, though, isn't it?
as much as their strategy is weak, they still suffer from a car that just seems to be completely unable to compete with anything. You look at the pace that either driver is able to achieve, even running in clean air. It's not a car that's quick, and it's not a car that's sort of quick in a straight line or quick round corners. It doesn't really seem to have a strength in any significant area. The net result is that it just sort of slides off your mind a bit like a sort of Teflon idea. It's just sort of gone and you're sort of left with nothing. I mean, if we don't have anything more to say on stake, which is rare we've had this much to say at all, we'll jump quickly into our winners and spinners, which I feel most of us have already touched upon our points so far. So I'll kick off with my winner from the weekend, and I feel it really has to be Ferrari. General competence and not throwing away their first win in Mexico since Prost in 1990. So for me, as a Tifosi, I'm happy with that one. We'll go Thiemo, your winner.
Haas, because I'm going to be mean to you and say Ferrari's 2 Route 1, but also the fact that Ellie-May, you were saying that Piastri couldn't get Magnussen, but Magnussen was also holding on for a good while to Russell's coattails at the start of that Grand Prix, and we were all just kind of like, how's he doing that? He's in a Haas, and we're kind of getting close to the point of not being able to make those kind of jokes anymore, which is good, but a shame in some ways, because we'll have to retire the joke.
Ellie-May, your winner?
Carlos. I think for the obvious, really. It was just a very strong weekend from him.
Mm. And Martin, your winner as well from the weekend.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with Ellie-May. Strong weekend, like 2 laps, good enough for the pole. Letting Max back through, just a sign of no fast maturity. And then the pass was clean as a whistle. It doesn't get better than that. So, and then just the pace, the tire management, him coming on the radio doing his own strategy, like it was tick, 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 tick. It was good.
One of those fantastic all-rounder races from Carlos Sainz. Meanwhile, on the other side of that, our spinners from this weekend, for me, it's got to be Max. It wasn't the drive of a world champion. It wasn't the drive of a professional. It wasn't clean and it was scrappy. It was argumentative. We've seen better from Max by a long standard. I think it's been quite some time since we've seen something quite this, I want to say, disrespectful in certain aspects, or certainly sort of messy.
2021 in that way, we haven't seen him be this kind of immature, let's say.
Yeah. Thiemo, you similarly echo this, as do you, Martin, with your spinners as well, I think.
Red Bull as a whole, they did it to themselves.
Yeah, like here's the thing, like and Schumacher's and Senna's had this as well, right? So maybe we can just wrap up and say, like, is this a characteristic of world champions that it comes with the package? Like, are there any Roger Federers in Formula One that can win gracefully, or do you need like Schumacher did some things, like we think Monaco qualifying, and when Senna wiped out Prost at turn 1 and these guys did these things that tarnished their careers in many ways, like, but then does it just come with the package? Is it all inclusive?
You've got the two types. You've got these dominant beasts, like you say, that will at some point do something, and then you've got the other drivers where they need to they throw everything they possibly have at it to get one title, and that's about all they can manage, like your Rosbergs and your Buttons, that sort of thing. They're very deserving of it, but they know that they've only got enough juice in the tank to do it the one time, whereas the others, they're like, we are willing to throw even more at it, and if that means we've got to do some of these sorts of things, like you say, then we'll do that. We're just going to be monsters for it, but you can't help but respect that a little bit in terms of what you're willing to do to get what you want.
Yeah, so yeah, you asked the question sort of how ruthless is someone's drive to win and drive to achieve. And I think we are again seeing that ruthless and sort of combative streak come out in Max Verstappen. I think other sports certainly have it. You look at potentially sort of the level of aggression that sometimes rugby matches will draw out of players, the fact they'll go for tackles they shouldn't be making, they'll make tackles that really should be disallowed because they're in that mood to make that win, to score that try. And you see it in other sports, I think, just with Formula One, when you have those levels of aggression come out, the nature of it is what you end up with is a very high energy impact and often a very relatively big crash, or the risk of coming together of two cars at high speeds. It's up the ante, but it's that same level of competitive spirit, regardless of sort of the outcome. Ellie-May, your spinner?
I've gone for steak just to try and have a different answer to everyone else. I would say Red Bull, but I think in terms of steak, okay, even if your car isn't there, why don't you then work on things like race craft or sort of how well that you can do your strategies and things like that, so that then when you do have a better car, it's already there embedded in the team. Because it's like, if just take a risk, but not one where you just say, let's just stay out and hope for a safety car. Do something a bit different with your tire strategy. Pit a bit early, do a one stop when everyone does a twos to see what happens, and have that bit of, I guess, a bit more of a fighting mentality in terms of things like strategy, so that it's there a bit more when you then get the better car. It's a bit like when we had the same argument with McLaren, that when they finally had a championship winning car, they didn't quite know what to do with it. If you start now, it's there for when you're better.
We've seen aspects of that. I mean, they're finally doing pit stops that are under 4 seconds, so they're making progress in the right direction, Stake. So yeah, it's a fair criticism though. We want to see, if they can't get the car right, at least get the sort of the pit wall stuff right.
I still think with the pit stops, they thought they were an Indy car, so that was an acceptable length for a pit stop, and then someone just, we're in a
we're
right.
not doing fueling. We've got 3
Guys.
people per wheel. Yes. Hurry up.
Yes.
Yeah. With winners and spinners out the way, we'll have a quick look at our predictions review. And 0 points for pole position. None of us thought it was going to be Carlos Sainz. 1 point for Ellie-May for a Carlos Sainz win. Don't quite know where she pulled that one from. No points for fastest lap, and no points for a wild prediction. So apparently we were too wild, and annoyingly Franco Colapinto for me did not make it onto the podium. When it comes to our fantasy F1 league, no, that is Sergio Perez, which is impressive. When it comes to our fantasy F1 teams and our league, for Mexico, follow Trackside Hub 1, 2, and 3 top out the standings at 235 points for the top 2 teams, 214 for its third. JB Racing in P5, On the Kerbs P8, Ellie-May's podcast team P12, and Sophia's F1 team P37 with -2 points. Not entirely how that was achieved. Also questioning as to whether or not
Ricardo's still in the team. She had Albon and she had Williams.
That'd do it. Yeah. Painful. Overall, Doors by Gunter Steiner still leads, 4,326 points. What's the Racing Point in second, 4,313 points. And Take a Stroll, 4,298 in third. JB Racing P11, On the Curves P12, Ellie-May's podcast team P18, and The Greatest Moustache languishing in P37. That is all we've got time for on this week's episode. We'll be back hopefully later this week with a preview for the Brazilian Grand Prix as the action moves down to Sao Paulo. In the meantime, where can the people find you, Martin?
Yeah, look, probably the best place right now is on YouTube. I'm putting out a lot of content like post-quali, post-race, what's happening. Like I said before, one of my videos went crazy through Argentina. So if you want to go in there and read some of the comments, you might find some interesting stuff in there.
Some unique points of view, let's say that much. Ellie-May, where can the people find you?
I'm sort of a bit in a lull at the minute, but I guess if you want to check out my Instagram page where I've got some racing photography going on from.
Oh, your shots, Ellie-May, are amazing. Like some of your ones around Silverstone are incredible. Do you take those yourself?
Yeah. With the sort of second-hand camera, just learning my way through. The whole year has just been like a learning curve. I've just winged it the whole time and just hoped for the best. And then sort of next year, hopefully I can just build upon that.
No, they're so, like, I've got a good eye for photography. They're really good. So it's not the car, it's the driver then, is what you're telling me?
Thank you.
Decor and a steak.
See what she can do. Can't be any worse. Thiemo, in the meantime, where can the people find you?
Social media is probably the best place to find everything that I'm up to. So t.august.daily.onthecurbs covers everything.
Very nice. And in the meantime, if you want more from me, I think at the time this goes out, you can still pick up the latest issue of Classic Car Weekly, which has got me borrowing an engineer from Red Bull to reinstall the engine into my MG. If not, there'll be a new issue out on Wednesday, pretty much the same day we'll be recording our preview for the Brazil Grand Prix. So, of course, there's all of that. And I'm also on social media at Jesse on Cars with all the usual nonsense appearing on there. So we'll be back in a few short days with some preview work ahead of the Brazilian Grand Prix. And as always, Martin, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you've for once we haven't dragged you out of bed early in the morning. We've sort of caught you on an evening. We're instead recording from a variety of locations on a lunchtime instead. But always a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
As always, we will be back, and we look forward to some more racing action from Sao Paulo.